The dawn of a new week, a new month, and a brand new episode of One Soccer Today with Gareth Wheeler, Oliver Platt, and Jordan Wilson.
Got my tree up.
My name is Adam Jenkins. That's right. It is holiday season, so amongst everything else, I'm sure everyone is decorating and feeling festive. And with that note of optimism and sunshine and snowflakes and sweet cookies, we begin with a Friday news dump that caught a lot of us off guard. Toronto FC announcing the rumors, the speculation, all of it, well, it was for nothing because now we actually have concrete news to talk about, and that is the ousting of John Herdman as head coach of Toronto Football Club. It was a resignation by John Herdman announced in the late hours of Friday afternoon. I think everyone who has been following Canadian soccer for a little bit of time understands that the embattled, now former Toronto FC manager, well, we were waiting for updates on what was going to happen. Of course, we understand after the independent investigation commissioned by the Canadian Soccer Association that churned up a lot of information about toxic, if to be quite frank, culture at Canada Soccer, the women's national team. Of course, that was John Herdman's former post, the drone spying scandals and the like. And finally, it seems John Herdman has been brought into the fold in terms of the discipline and the fallout from everything originating in Paris this summer. I guess it's a quick and simple question, Oliver Platt, of we begin by asking, what do you make of the news of John Herdman's resignation?
Yeah, not a huge surprise in the end. There'd been a little bit of momentum, rumblings, whatever you want to call it, building towards this. I think over the past few weeks that John Herdman was probably not going to be long for TFC and not their head coach next season. It feels to me like one where he's kind of jumped and done it on his own terms to a certain extent, at least before he was pushed. And what percentage of that was to do with the drone stuff, and what percentage of it was to do with new leadership coming in at MLSE and TFC and wanting to take this in a different direction. Ultimately, I don't think really matters that much. There was clearly just a feeling here that this wasn't going to work out. So not a huge surprise, but now I think obviously massive consequences for TFC and a huge decision to make going forwards for them. Massive consequences for John Herdman. We'll see if Canada Soccer is still pursuing some kind of sanction against him in this investigation into him. Obviously something that, at least when this season started and Herdman made such a positive start to life at Toronto FC, you wouldn't have foreseen him being out of the job by the end of the season.
Well, Jordan Wilson, gone are the days where the Italian superstars are scoring goals or setting up goals and running over and leaping into the awaiting arms of their gaffer. We don't know what their future holds, but we do know that the man prowling the touchline next year won't be Mr. Herdman. Your thoughts on Friday's news?
I was surprised initially, and then when I reflected and thought back on it, I'm like, this kind of makes sense. For me, if you're looking at John Herdman and what history has taught us about him in terms of he was a guy that oversaw the club for a bit, the first one in my tenure or my lifetime to do that, to just kind of wait and see, and didn't really want to spoil his record towards the end of last season. To go out on his own terms, maybe before he's about to get fired, or maybe you speculate, right? Because we don't know, but maybe it's a situation where you're looking at the club and it's not going to improve that much, and you're like, do I really have the fire in my belly to go and do this again for another season? So I was shocked that the resignation came when it did initially, but when I look at it, this makes sense. This is a John Herdman move. This is him saying peace out on my own accord, and I'm going to get out while I can before it gets maybe worse. That's just my take on it.
Gareth Wheeler.
Yeah, a lot of eyes in there for whatever reason. Look, first off, just from a relationship perspective, I think all of us who have covered this game in this country over the last decade or so, have longer than that, have developed relationships with John Herdman. And the way that I look at this all is a significant tragedy. I mean, this is a house of cards tumbling down with great speed and pace. I don't think many people would have predicted this a few years ago, but unfortunately for John, and trying to think about the individual in this case, because a lot of people that have been part of Canadian soccer have been kicked while they're down, and they're put in a real negative light after they are gone. We do this to our own, but I'm not sure if John fits the bill here because a lot of what he did was self-inflicted. Um, that's what makes this entirely a tragedy and so disappointing. I think that, well, it's going to be from two perspectives. From John Herdman's perspective, I don't think that he wanted to go in front of our government, wanted to go in front of Parliament and try to defend himself, based upon the heated nature of everything that's transpired since last summer. I don't know how Bev Priestman's going to proceed with managing the situation, but perhaps based upon what they know about each other, there might have been something preemptive here. Obviously, with lingering potential punishment being levied his way, being part of Toronto FC, who's a member club within Canada Soccer, they're a voting member in terms of being part of the Canadian Soccer Association. If you're the head coach of that club, you fall under that jurisdiction. Canada Soccer, in a way, could pass that on to a disciplinary committee, wipe their hands free of it from whatever punishment that they decide that needs to be levied, and they can push it on to FIFA if they really want to go that route. But are there too many people connected to this situation that might want to be exposed? Do Canada Soccer just want to turn the page? For John, I think that he just came to the conclusion that he needed to turn the page, and dealing with all of this entire situation wasn't worth it. So maybe get a bit of a payout from Toronto FC, exit stage left, maybe even exit the country entirely. That probably makes a lot of sense at this point. For Toronto FC, from a practical perspective, they don't want this hovering over their head. They have a new man in charge in Keith Pelly, who I think that brings a lot of energy to the project. I think there's a lot of faith that he's going to make the right moves and do the right things. He has relationships within Birmingham City and other people in football that have been looking at this club. And for me, the biggest indictment and the biggest tell that John Herdman wasn't long for this job was when Keith Pelly admitted on the year-end media availability that there was no clear identity here. I mean, this is exactly what John Herdman was supposed to bring to the table. And once that was clear that the man in charge didn't believe that he was establishing what needed to be established, I mean, this was case closed, slam shut. I know from internal discussions, John Herdman became a very isolated figure inside the BMO Field training ground since the drone story broke. And this is the way that John works. Like, he makes so many people feel like they matter, like he's a cultivator of belonging and atmosphere. But the thing is, he keeps that circle so tight, and if you're not in that circle, then you're out. Like, you're in or you're out, and that circle continues to shrink, and does so wherever he goes. And that's because this is the way that he operates, whether it's through his own insecurities for a guy that presents outwardly being so confident. I don't know what it is, but it causes problems for him because we live in a world of gray area, and you need to be able to play nice in the sandbox in times. And all of these things would have been very apparent to anyone that worked within Toronto FC at that time. So at this really important period of time for the club, they needed to make a decision. And now, whether they want to move forward like this, or whether they need to pay a little to get out of this situation so they can start fresh. So I understand it from both perspectives, and it was a matter of time. It became abundantly clear that John Herdman wouldn't be on the touchline to start next season. Better to do that now so then they can proceed to move forward.
Well, very well explained and thorough set of thoughts and offerings from Gareth Wheeler, and a few things that I, for one, would like to dig a little bit deeper in with our panel. And I guess I'll pick up where Gareth sort of left off in terms of the future and what that holds for 2025 and beyond. And I think what's interesting is when you start to talk about somebody's legacy and in anyone's career, there is different chapters, there are different phases, and you can differentiate, although sometimes the brush you use to fill in the colors of someone's outlined legacy is the same brush. There are different sections. And I guess we'll talk about what this means for John, for TFC, and for the future. But I think just as we are in a situation, and maybe I'm considering a bit too much of last year, where we kind of came into 2024 as a Canadian soccer ecosystem with a lot of similar faces, not a lot of change with the 11 professional clubs. Of course, we have 6 new ones coming in a new league as well next year, but that theme of change has continued. continued. And we've already seen Vanni Sartini bid farewell to Vancouver Whitecaps, Carlos Gonzalez out at Atletico Ottawa, Mario Eustachio taking over from Benjamin Mora. So you start to wonder what's next for these people in a season of change, Ollie. And I know it's maybe 72 hours old, but with everything we know and everything we can posticulate on, do you see a future for John Herdman in North America? Maybe not immediately, maybe down the road, but I guess the question is this the last we've seen of John Herdman in North American soccer?
I don't think I would go that far just yet. I think it's probably going to need some time. Certainly, I think people will maybe draw, the Whitecaps job is open. John Herdman lives in Vancouver, has lived in Vancouver for a long time. Could that be something? I'd be shocked if he's considered for that job at this point. I think for some of the reasons Will's outlines, there's probably a need for Herdman himself to lay low in terms of a Canadian setting for the time being. But also just from the Whitecaps point of view, I think to go from Vanni Sartini, who did a lot of work there, I think to change the culture and to create a more open club, to then bring in, a lot of baggage that will come wherever John Herdman goes with his next job would for me be a massive surprise. So I wouldn't see anything immediate in that sense in terms of him continuing to work in Canada. Whether there's something in the United States for him, I'm not sure, but I think probably a little bit of time is going to be needed here.
Garrett, do you agree? Preach time.
That was the one thing. Like, I always thought the Vancouver Whitecaps job was kind of the job for him post men's national team. And Sartini being removed from his position on the same week that this happens with John Herdman, like, if I was Joe Rogan, or like some sort of like guy that wanted to dig a little bit deeper, maybe like, hey, it's that's what's going on here. The job is available. I know that Greg Kerfoot has been a great supporter of John Herdman, as well as the Canadian men's national team, by the way, over the course of their run in terms of the financial backing and the run to the World Cup. I'm just not sure where that relationship is right now. In the past, I think that it could have maybe been something. Where are things today? I'm not quite sure about that. That would be the one landing spot. But like I said, it's up to the Canadian Soccer Association how they want to proceed with this investigation, how they want to handle potential discipline. I don't think that this goes away unless the CSA wants it to go away. And now that it's being brought up in governmental circles, I don't think that easily goes away. So that might need to be elevated to a certain level where John's immediate future maybe determined somewhere else. I don't think he's done coaching, by the way. Like, redemption stories, they're all over the map. Like, the one thing about this entire thing, like, it's easy for him to defend. Like, I was just trying to get a competitive advantage and bring a country to a place where it's never been before. You can sell that in just how deep it went. Like, things can be twisted and turned. So I don't think he's done in the game, but I think he'll have to take some time on the sideline for now in order to let the kind of the sea settle to a certain degree.
Yeah, and when you sort of look at the macro picture here, from the hometown of both of these coaches to the connection between Bev Priestman and John Herdman, and the overlaps, I think it is important to say that at the moment, some of the worst or more serious allegations and reporting against Bev Priestman have to do with culture and toxic workplaces and the like. None of that has necessarily directly afflicted John Herdman in the same way. So ultimately, if this downfall is created by at least the drone scandal in the first place, it's different than what Bev Priestman is facing. And Jordan, as a person and a player who's writing quite his own legacy right now in Canadian soccer, from player to pundit, legacy is the question I want to ask you next. And I think I've posed this exact question on OST in weeks past about the fall for John Herdman in terms of where he brought this program to resigning on a Friday afternoon in a Friday afternoon news cycle. What do you think this does for his legacy? Can you look at it in two different ways, or is it all lumped together as a fall from the footballing heavens?
I think you got to look at it two different ways. I think I agree with Wheels in terms of it being a tragedy, and Ollie alluded to it as well. But that is just the last bit of it, right? The last bit of this chapter for John Herdman. Like, when you look at this guy as a coach for Canada, and this is why he got that TFC job, in my opinion, as well, was a motivator of men. Like, you got the 2012 bronze medal, 2016 bronze medal as well for the women. Then he was a guy, I will say, a very talented group in Canadian soccer, right? When you have the likes of your coaching Alfonso Davies and Jonathan David, like, for sure, at a young age and an eager group. Absolutely. But he was still the man that got everyone to believe within that group. and then this country as well. So I think there's just two sides of it. I think there's a part one of John Herdman and a part two. And the part two right now we're focusing on is a guy that was sipping too much of his Kool-Aid, maybe had a bit too much power. His ego got to him a little bit too much, and it led to his inevitable downfall. But the part before where he was eager and he brought people together and there were teams that were playing and and driving, and he was the catalyst, you can't ignore that. So for me, in modern day, we like to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but two things can be true. Like, he was a guy that brought this all together, but again, it's just, I think with that power and the way that he got so um hooked up on his ego, that really led to his downfall. But for me, there's two things. I still think for Canada, he'll be regarded as a legend for sure. I think he should be.
Oh. That I think is kind of the question that Jordan touched on there, is that, you know, this is a complicated legacy and there is different sides to it, and some of it was very good. But the focus right now is going to be very much on how it's finished, right? And the drone stuff and everything that goes with that. And 1 year at TFC that hasn't worked out. And I think the question is, does time heal some wounds there, and the legacy gets remembered in a more, what I would say is about more balanced way as to what John Herdman accomplished in his time in Canada? Or is that always going to be the focus now, you know, and is that going to diminish from what he did achieve? Because he achieved a lot. There's no question about that. There's no disputing that. You know, he's had a transformative impact on football in this country, comparable to pretty much anyone who's worked in Canadian soccer. You know, I think people can say he came in with Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David with the men, and you know, similarly with a very good pool of players with the women that was maybe ready to achieve more. But it's revisionism, I think, to diminish his role in accomplishing that and helping them to accomplish that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. But for me, and again, I go back to something I think Will's touched on before. As much as there has been maybe some overstatement and maybe a little bit of, you know, some of the discourse around Herdman, I think, has been a little bit over the top. For me, a lot of this was self-inflicted and was kind of his own doing, you know, not just in terms of the drone stuff, but even when you look back on his last year in charge of the men's national team, the way that all the off-field stuff overwhelmed everything, the flirting with different jobs every few months, like, that was stuff that I think he had a certain degree of control and influence over, and ultimately saw him lose his way a little bit in that job.
And that certainly happened. Just stay with me for a second. He was the right man for the right job when it came to the women's national team. After what they've been through, they needed someone that could bring them together, and he absolutely did that. Had Christine Sinclair in her prime and a good team around him, and he got the most out of that team. He deserves credit for that. I think that he'll be a really good women's team manager somewhere else. The Canada stuff, he took over. It's very difficult for me to separate. You know, he took over at a time where he's got the two horses, two guys, Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies, and this emerging young group of players that needed some direction. Boom, COVID hits. And you go through some incredibly weird World Cup qualifying campaign where Canada did manage to have some qualitative advantages based upon the way they scheduled things, the chartered flights, the travel, and this team was able to achieve incredible things. And with John Herdman as the front man for that, he made the country believe. And I think that feeling, you can't take away that from anyone. What we experienced and how he was attached to that for me is his greatest legacy from a real positive perspective. But we can't leave out of the equation how things were left. The New Zealand job debacle, flirting with other jobs, the dismay and destruction. I feel like a lot, but that's gone on. He kind of pulled the pin on the grenade and let it go off within Canadian soccer in recent times. And then he publicly called them out. Then he tried to wipe his hands clean of it. Things that might just be like a footnote now, like the Iran match that was booked. Like, he allowed other people to take the fall for something from him and his technical team wanted. There was so much that's played out, and I'll write a book on it someday, I'm sure. Or someone will. If it's Josh Klug writes the books, I don't. I mean, there's so much. And the way that he left the program wasn't in a better place than when he took over. And that's what you want to do. You want to leave things in a better place. From a results perspective, yes, but from a dysfunction perspective, absolutely not. And then he went to Toronto FC, guys. And let's be honest, I think that he proved that he was a little bit over his head. He was the front man on a staff, and none of them had ever managed a professional club team ever. and just they went on a streak where they lost 7 games in a row. I said this throughout the season. There was nothing that I saw on the field of play that would have made anyone at TFC that was making an executive decision saying that we need to keep this guy. Second half of games last season, 23 goals scored, 45 conceded. It's like they started the game like they were shot out of a cannon, but there was no plan B, C, D, E, F, nothing. I watched this team play. I'm like, I know exactly what they're going to do. And I just thought that the team didn't advance under him, and some of the techniques, the performative stuff on the field. Again, it just screamed to me like a group that was very insecure of where they stood, that were trying to mask that and show that they were ultra confident in everything they did. And at the end of the day, internally, that's going to be found out. That can only be last so long. Maybe you can kind of fool and spend way too much money with the Canadian Soccer Association, by the way, with a board of directors who are all volunteers, who aren't engaged on the day-to-day basis. You can't do that for a big company like Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. So here we are today. I wish him the best of luck going forward. Thank you for the great memories, but the destruction left behind, especially with Canadian soccer, is going to be part of his legacy as well.
All right, a thorough, immediate autopsy of the John Herdman news from Friday. This story will continue to evolve as we find out perhaps his next landing point. If we hear more from John Herdman, which I would imagine is unlikely, but hey, we'll keep our eyes and ears to the ground. And in the coming days over the offseason, a look ahead to what this means for TFC moving forward as well. Let's get to today's Visa Women's Football Report. Presented by Visa, today's women's football report. We are in the middle of an international friendly for our women's national team. They seem to be having the time of their lives in southeastern Spain at the minute with Secret Santa and everything else going along off the pitch. But we're going to talk about what's happening on the pitch because we watched a game just a few days ago, Canada and Iceland, an international friendly. And I'll be honest, for one of the final games of 2024, it's probably the most disappointed I have been with this women's national team in this calendar year. The chances created, but then the silly mistakes, the number of offsides, the lack of urgency, perhaps the lack of experimentation, depending on who you ask. Jordan Wilson, you are on the couch for it. We're going to review before we preview the Republic of Korea. You've had a few days to simmer and marinate. What are your thoughts on Cindy Ty's first match as interim head coach and a goalless draw against Iceland?
Well, you covered a lot of things, so I'm glad I don't have to rehash that about the offsides and all that goodness that had me a bit disappointed. But I think when you look at this women's national team towards the end of the year, the calendar year, you just want to see a little bit more life. I will say they've been through a lot and a lot has happened. I think that's starting to play on them a little bit in terms of their performance. But I want to see more subs, maybe some teenagers making their debut. This would be the time to go and do that. Goals, something I always want to see when you're playing games, and they just look a little bit flat from the offensive standpoint. But things that I liked about this game were obviously anytime you don't concede, that's something to celebrate. But the fact that Jessie Fleming and Olivia Smith came on and really just showed that, look, these top players that Canada has can really go and change a game. I'd love to see that. You want to see more of that connection and chemistry develop. Another thing is, unpopular opinion, Simia Wujo playing that 6. I really enjoyed that because I think everyone talks about Desiree Scott and the role that she had to play, but she was, for me, just a player that had talent but knew her role and really bought into the suffering that goes on with that. I think Simia Wujo has a higher ceiling. I think she could be that player if she's given the keys to go and do that and the tools and someone really coaches her. So on a day where it wasn't great, there were still some highlights, but I hate that there were a little bit more lowlights than I expected.
Oliver Platt.
Yeah, I thought it was awful, to be honest with you. And I don't say that just to be like, unnecessarily harsh, but I kind of say it a little bit because I think you need to start ringing the alarm bells with this team. Like they're drifting and they badly need an injection of something new and a new vision to come in, with obviously the head coach appointment that's going to happen. But like that was Iceland's, and there was nearly 800 caps in the Canada lineup. Like as much as there's some players unavailable, it wasn't a heavily rotated team. There's a lot of familiar faces there. And Iceland had the best chance of the game, as you just saw in those highlights. And I saw Iceland playing with, although they're a limited side, some actual patterns and some ideas in their play. And not a lot of the same thing from Canada. So some of the individuals played okay. Jade Rivera, I thought, played well, was a worthy man of the match, player of the match, I should say. I think Aladu had a decent impact as well. Obviously, still early days for her, but as a team performance, like having had almost none of the ball against Spain and conceding over 30 shots to then 0-0 with Iceland and just no real football played, very few chances created. It's worrying for me, and it's another sign of why we really need that head coach appointment to be a really big one in the trajectory of this team.
What's fascinating here for me, or the most fascinating thing from it, Ollie, is I'm with you where I thought the performance was awful, and there are a lot of questions, and maybe it's not the note you want to end on heading into 2025. What's almost irrational or hard to believe is the fact that we don't know what's going to happen on the match tomorrow night, Tuesday on One Soccer, and then play Republic of Korea. This team hasn't lost all season, save for a couple of penalties.
It's
but
amazing.
It is incredible that they are unbeaten other than penalty shootouts this season, and yet we're feeling like this because I think after the disappointment of the World Cup, the hope and the desire for this team was to go out and prove a little bit more, and maybe they can in 2025 once that new head coach is named and there's a new chapter to be written in this women's national team history. But when we think of Republic of Korea, it is a side, I believe, who are a few spots lower in the FIFA World Rankings. They just got thrashed by the Spanish team that Canada drew 1-1. What are you hoping to see from them other than a win in something a bit more convincing in just about 36 hours here?
I'm not sure what you can accomplish with an interim coach in one match, like in terms of changing the direction of the team or the way they're going to play. Like it's one game, it's not enough. So my only answer to that question is different faces. Same thing as I said before the Iceland game. I know some of them came on off the bench, but I think you have to see more substantial changes to the lineup and just give whoever's coming in as the new coach a little bit of tape on some of these players who we're less familiar with.
And then some attacking urgency, please. Like it has to be. I mean, you can't play a game and look at your strikers or your wingers and be like, yeah, they're in second gear. Like they kind of want it. At this point, this is what you're there for. You're playing, you're training all day to play matches, to go out and show what you can do. It has to be better from them tomorrow.
Just 2024 was the year where Canada got it right with Jesse Marsh, who's going to be part of this search team to bring in the women's manager. That just puts all the pressure on. Just they need to get the right person for that job in 2025, sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. 9 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Atlantic time, Canada versus the Republic of Korea. Full match day live coverage with Andy Petrillo, Jordan Wilson, and Amy Welsh. And yours truly will be back in the booth with you for one last go around.
Bring it home, Jenko. Bring it home, buddy.
90 more minutes, ladies and gentlemen. 90 more minutes as well in the MLS season. MLS Cup now officially set. It will be the New York Red Bulls on the road to, and I always get this name wrong, Dignity Health Sports Park, despite spending about 72 hours at the facility. Thank you, Jordan Wilson. But that's right, LA Galaxy are through. I don't think based on our predictions, many are surprised on the panel. But Gareth, we don't have a ton of time to go in depth today, but we want to make sure we cover it because MLS Cup is set. I'll give you about 90 seconds on the Galaxy, and I assume why you think they're the favorites to win it all.
I can be quicker than that. Red Bulls are a great story, but this is the Galaxy's MLS Cup to lose. Unfortunately, Ricky Puig, a very good young player, one of the best in MLS, is out, did his ACL. The story from a Canadian perspective, though, is Greg Vanney and his staff, with people that have spent a lot of time in this country, have done an outstanding job and gone through some difficult times reaching this point. This team plays Greg Vanney's style of football. What a legacy that he is leaving in terms of what he is as a coach in Major League Soccer. A true great, in my humble opinion, at all facets of it, and 90 plus minutes away from winning an MLS Cup with his second team, one of very few to do that across Major League Soccer. So we'll build up to it this week, but Greg Vanney and his staff deserve a whole lot of credit, including Canadian Jason Bent.
Go on, Bent.
Bingo. 45 seconds, even more impressive, Gareth Wheeler. We have to quickly get to today's Tony Bet Top Picks. Presented by Tony Bet, the top picks for the day, one match per pundit, and we are going to go quickly with our picks. Gareth Wheeler, Man City, shockingly favored, minus 278 at home to Forest at plus 740.
City could win this game. I mean, this has been a really, really fun. I
We're
could
not-
win big. Win to nil is my bet. Pep went very defensive against Liverpool. I think he's got to compensate. So City to win to nil to get a little extra juice here.
Ooh.
Arsenal minus 209 Ollie against the United at plus 540.
Sorry, Wills. I watched the Arsenal game on the weekends, and that
We're
scoreline
in
was
trouble.
closer than it should have been. They were absolutely dominant
Yeah.
for certainly the first part of that
We
game.
were?
I'm gonna take them.
Arsenal
5-2.
are
Have you ever
brilliant.
seen
Jordan
5-2?
Wilson.
Brilliant.
Have you seen 5-2 in the
Dynamite.
EPL ever in the first half?
I know, crazy. Should have been
Crazy.
5-0.
Wilson wanted to weigh in on that one, so no pick from him. Maybe that's good for his record. Our Tony Bet top picks. Our
Back
show
Arsenal.
today. OST will be back with the women's national team against the Republic of Korea tomorrow. We will see you at noon